As we are approaching the top of a new hour, I want to segue to some of these international headlines. Taking a look here at a tweet from Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst. There's a photo there, and in the caption he says, interviewing Syrian rebels between Hama and Homs. So Syrian rebels are now telling Fox News that following their unexpected victory over the Assad regime, they want to stop fighting and work with the West. Let's get to that full report from Fox News chief foreign correspondent Trey Yingst. He has more from Damascus.
It's been 4 days since the dramatic overthrow of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, and life is slowly returning to normal here in Damascus. Today, we were among the first Western journalists allowed to enter Syria from the north. We saw a country scarred by war, but looking ahead to a hopeful future.
People's smiles are now returning. Thank God Damascus and Syria as a whole have returned to what they used to be.
Most of the Syrian rebels we spoke with said they want to stop fighting and focus on rebuilding. They have no interest in conflict with Israel or the U.S. And when I asked about President-elect Trump, they said they're looking forward to working with the Americans. The message echoed by the rebel leadership, claiming this is a new Syria.
The source of our fears was from the Iranian militias, Hezbollah and the regime. So their removal is the solution for Syria.
At the moment, this is a country filled with emotion and elation. We've seen some people tearing down posters of Assad, while others are simply watching and waiting to see what comes next. The rebel group in charge of Syria is a designated terrorist organization, but they say things will be different this time around. But there's a possible complication, a growing Israeli military presence in western Syria, aimed at making sure Iran doesn't gain a foothold.
I came here today to make sure that Iran will not succeed in creating an eastern front against Israel.
As we arrived in the Syrian capital, rebel forces implemented yet another curfew for civilians here trying to keep the order. In Damascus, Trey Yingst, Fox News.
Thank you to Trey Yingst there with that report. Let's dive into all of this news even further with a retired Marines intelligence officer, host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kemper. Hal, so you were watching that report and I saw you kind of reacting there in real time in the background. A lot to unpack here. So this rebel group, designated as a terrorist organization, they're saying that things are different now. They want to work with the U.S. How would that look? Is that even possible?
It's very difficult. Corel, I got to tell you, this group, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this is the current manifestation of what was called the Al-Nusra Front, which was Al-Qaeda of Syria. And there are those of us who remember very clearly 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. And actually, if you look at Jilani, he was working at one time with al-Baghdadi, who eventually went on to found and lead ISIS, the self-proclaimed caliph of the ISIS caliphate. So, yes, there's a lot to work through there. And the U.S. has a tough time because one thing is we got a $10 million bounty on the head of Jilani, who's the head of the HTS. And, of course, we've designated HTS a terrorist group. With that said, they are saying things that, frankly, are things that are being receptive to Western ears. And Secretary Blinken has put out there some conditions, which basically democratic elections. This goes really back to a UN Security Council resolution sometime back, which, talks 2015 and things when, Bashar Assad was basically using chemical weapons against his own people. But, what is the pathway? And the pathway is secular. It's democratic elections. It's respect for human rights to include the rights of women, and there are other signs that are coming out of there that some of the HTS leadership have said they're going to be Taliban light, whatever that means. Which we know what the Taliban did when they came to power in Afghanistan, and frankly that was not good for human rights, and it was not good for the rights of women, and it was anti-education. It was a lot of things that are the antithesis of modern society. So I think the actions will speak louder than the words. We're going to be watching them very carefully. With that said, one of the things we're very concerned about is what is HTS going to do with the Russians? The Russians have two huge bases there. They have their really sole Mediterranean warm water port is in Tartus. It's the Tartus port. It's in Syria. And without that port, they don't have a warm water port in the Mediterranean. In fact, they cease to be a Mediterranean naval power of any significance because the Dardanelles Straits, the Turkish Straits, are blocked to naval combatant ships going back and forth. So this is a big issue. Also, that airport nearby is a major conduit for not just Russian operations in the Middle East, but it's a conduit for Russian operations throughout Africa, to include the Sahel region. And this is where you've seen so much Russian involvement in various different countries in that, that kind of north central, if you will, Africa, that desert region that shoots all the way across northern Africa. So it's a big challenge, and the Russians are obviously going to make some sort of concession, some sort of deal. They have their ships parked right off the coast, so to speak. I should say anchored right off the coast. They didn't send them off, steaming off to Cuba or up to St. Petersburg or something like that. So the question is, what will the Russians offer them? So there's a limited time window here to maybe make a deal. But then again, we're going to watch what HTS does. It's not just what they say, it's what they do.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Russia and their placement now in Syria, because we know that Russia, big ally to the Assad regime there, they've already offered Bashar Assad political asylum. He is there in Russia. So in terms of, kind of seeing where this goes, and also given the fact that Russia is embroiled in their own conflict right now with Ukraine, this situation in Syria, where does it land on the list of priorities for Russia? What is Putin thinking right now?
Well, he's thinking this is a huge setback. One of the things he's done to try to offset all the setbacks he's had with the war in Ukraine, and certainly the incursion into Russian territory in Kursk by the Ukrainian military, where they still hold that territory. Despite having a larger Russian force to push the Ukrainians out, the Ukrainians are fighting fiercely and holding Russian terrain in Kursk. So that's very frustrating to Putin. The other side is his economy is in shambles. It is in horrible shape. Their interest rate is through the roof. They have enormous problems. The ruble is devalued dramatically, which causes a lack of confidence with all the Russian people, because suddenly everything becomes that much more expensive. Huge inflation. They have a lot of systemic ways they try to hide how bad the economy is, but it's in absolutely horrific shape. And there's a lot of discussion that in the current situation that the Russian economy will implode sometime before the end of 2025. So that's a very serious problem. Trying to offset that perceptual and the perception of the Russians is that he's trying to say, look, we're this global power. Look at all the things we're doing in Africa. Look at all the things we're doing in the Middle East. And then he literally just had the rug pulled out from under him in the Middle East and with his Africa presence, because that was the big Russian basing presence for air and sea was in Syria. That was their, if you will, critical infrastructure for Russian military involvement in that part of the world. And really one fell swoop, within a week, it was gone, or it's not gone yet. I mean, HTS doesn't physically control that part. That is the Alawite clan's traditional homeland. The Alawite clan is the Shiite clan, if you will, of where the Assad family is from. They have not, as far as I know, completely relinquished the ground. So as far as I know, the Russians still kind of control the bases. There are Russian aircraft showing up in satellite aircraft. They're actually at the Communion air base that's right there, which is a big Russian air base near Tartus, which is the big naval base. The ships, all the combatants, everything afloat there has moved off to sea. And of course, the other thing is that the Israelis went in there and wiped out. And you got to remember, you got Syrian ships that are sharing the same general coastal area, same ports, if you will. The Israelis came in and basically wiped out the entire Syrian Navy. They're not really a very impressive Navy, but they do have some anti-ship missiles and anti-air capability. And the Israelis wanted to make sure that those didn't fall into the hands of terrorists. So they went ahead and hit those ships and sank those ships and destroyed that Navy. Well, that's got to get the attention of the Russians. If you're a Russian ship captain and you're across the port from where you're seeing this happen, you're like, I got to get my ship out of here. And they moved them off the coast. But the question is, where are they going to go? They didn't send them far away. So where are they going to go?
All right, I want to move on from the Middle East a little bit, still discussing Russia, though. I'm going to put up a tweet here, how this is from the Kyiv Post, and it's regarding to a question that I have here, a topic that I'd like you to touch on. So earlier today, we saw that the Ukrainian President Zelensky blasting a call that the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban had with Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which Orban said that he had proposed a, quote, Christmas ceasefire. Zelensky, however, saying that this move undermines Western unity. Your thoughts on this call? Really, what can we gauge from that situation? The fact that the Hungarian Prime Minister is having this personal call with Putin. It lasted about an hour, I've heard.
We're never going to be able to stop Orban from calling Putin, no matter what we do. He will do that. He has a relationship with Putin that goes way back. It's been kind of a thorn in the side of the European Union. Of course, one of the things that is bothersome with the European Union is they have a rotating presidency, and guess who the president is? Orban. And he has been making trips and all sorts of stuff, saying that he represents the European Union, and every time he comes back from a trip, the European Union says no. He just happens to be sitting in that position of being president. It's a rotating position, and so there's been a lot of friction, to say the least, within our European allies. Viktor Orban, he's kind of a fan of Putin. He's somewhat of an autocrat, if you will. If you look at how he's been running Hungary, he's definitely seen as an autocrat there, not very big on what we would call democratic institutions and checks and balances and all that stuff. He's very much for executive power. And he has not been a fan of aid going to Ukraine. He's had to have his arm twisted several times in order not to block aid going to Ukraine and other sorts of support. So that, I don't know that I would, it's possible he may have said something that could have been interpreted as some sort of Christmas ceasefire or Christmas armistice or something like that. But President Zelensky has come out and said, absolutely not. He didn't say that. And it does have the shades of being sort of an information operation, which is sort of, almost, I'm not saying he made it up completely whole cloth, but it could be, and it could be the way it was interpreted through, the Russians will make up stuff whole cloth in a heartbeat, but it could have been spun in such a way that it looks like that Ukraine and President Zelensky pushed back on a sincere effort to, move towards a ceasefire before Christmas. And I don't have to regale anyone with the history of the war will be over by Christmas, the troops will be back by Christmas. I can't tell you how many long wars have begun with the saying that it'll be done by Christmas. And of course, it keeps going for years and years and years. This does sound like it was playing on that Christmas theme, if you will, of saying we're going to try and get a ceasefire by Christmas. And that's clearly playing to the ears of a Western audience. But there's frankly no way that anyone could possibly conceive of a ceasefire in the current situation that could be ended by Christmas. In fact, I find it very doubtful that anything could happen by January 20th, the inauguration, despite what may have been said in the campaign. And there's a lot of reasons why. And by the way, Europe is, this is another thing too, that's happened in the last few years. Europe now contributes more towards Ukraine in terms of military aid and aid overall than the United States. So the United States is a major contributor, don't get me wrong, but Europe has really kind of stepped up. And frankly, when the war started, they weren't there. In fact, they were well behind that power curve, if you will, but they have stepped up. So it's a different Europe today.
Well, speaking of the United States, because you did mention them a little bit there, the U.S. also warning that they think that Russia is going to be using a new type of missile against Ukraine in the coming days. Hal, what do we know about this weapon? Could it be a game changer in the war?
Not really. It's the weapon. It's an old missile with a new name. It's probably a better way to put it. They have done some modifications on it. You know, they had a missile that went really long. It was an intercontinental ballistic missile, and now it doesn't go so far, but it goes a little bit faster. And you can see the trade-off there, which is you burn the fuel faster to get a faster missile. Now, they fired one of these missiles a few weeks ago. They fired it into, I think a couple weeks ago, into Dnipro, which was, and it was widely remarked. It got a lot of attention. The warheads were not warheads. They were non-kinetic, if you will. They didn't explode. The missile itself was originally designed for a nuclear warhead. These were previously ICBMs that have been kind of changed into IR, intermediate range ballistic missiles, just for that. So the fact that one of these missiles was used definitely got everybody's attention. But they were using inert warheads or inert reentry vehicles, if you will. But they are MIRV, multiple independent reentry vehicles. So one missile can put multiple warheads into an area. The threat on this one is that the missiles will actually be conventional explosives, but they're going to be actually explosive warheads, which could cause some serious damage, particularly when combined with the kinetic energy that a high speed or, hypersonic missile like this could possibly entail. So it could cause some serious damage. Will it be a game changer? Not really in terms of the kinetic damage, in terms of the actual battle damage that it would inflict. The issue is it's really more for optics. The fact that they're using a weapon like this that was designed for nuclear weapons. It's a way of threatening. It's a way to rattle that nuclear saber without actually using a nuclear weapon or a nuclear warhead, which Russia definitely would not want to do, because that is uncorking a genie, so to speak, that they can't put back in the bottle. And there's a very good chance that China would then be compelled to sever its alliance with Russia if Russia was to do something so rash. China fully understands what that means if a nuclear warhead goes off in the battlefield. So Russia, I like to think they do, but there are times where I think they may have forgotten some of the lessons of the Cold War in that regard. So it doesn't change things. What it does, though, is it does indicate just how serious Russia's armaments problem is. One of the reasons they're using this missile, and one of those reasons you see this huge surge of drones and missiles going into Ukraine right now, is they're starting to run out of a lot of the missiles and ordnance and drones and things that they've had over time. They're trying to do the most they can with that North Korean ammunition and weapons that have been coming in, but they're having to go to things that they normally wouldn't do. And I consider this kind of the weaponeering offset of something we saw before, where some months back we noted that they had their essentially like their Space Force or Strategic Air Force troops literally on the line fighting as line infantry. Now, these are highly trained, in many cases, highly educated soldiers or airmen that were out there being used as line infantry, a job for which they are not really that proficient at, they're not well trained at. And it really is a mismatch of human resources, of military talent. And it's talent that when you lose it, you can't really regain it quickly once it's lost on the battlefield, unlike some other military personnel that they pull from. And I'm thinking of the prisons in that regard, in which case they really don't care. But in this case, that really got our attention. And now we're seeing not only the troops being misused, but now they're using these systems that those troops used to be in charge of controlling being used in a very strange way. And I think it just shows that Russia's starting to run out of resources that they can throw at the battlefield. Despite everything you see, despite all the modest gains you see on the battlefield in Kursk and elsewhere, they have some very serious long-term logistics challenges that I don't know if they can overcome.
All right, Hal, I think we covered a lot with all of these developments in the Middle East, also with Russia and Ukraine. Hal Kemper, retired Marines intelligence officer, host of the Strat podcast. There's so much more that we have to watch out for, so no doubt we'll be checking in with you soon. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Corel.
Of course.